Hi, welcome back to the workshop for episode 21 of the Shed of Dreams ES335 build, and in this episode we finally get to move that body to one side and we'll start working on the neck. Okay, so after what can only realistically be described as a very long time, we finally got the body to a stage where we can step away from it for a little while and concentrate our efforts on getting the neck sorted out. And the first stage in that is to get the fretboard underway. And for the fretboard, I've got a nice little piece of rosewood. There's a little bit of figure in there, but it's not kind of wildly figured. But to be honest, there's quite a lot going on with the wood on the body, so I don't want to be too over the top with that. Because, unlike virtually every other guitar I've ever built, it's not going to have dot markers. I've actually got some genuine mother of pearl block markers to go on this one, not in that order. So that's going to be a new thing for me as well. I've got myself some fret wire. It's not the jumbo stuff, it's a little bit thinner than that, but it is still fairly chunky. I was trying to kind of compromise between the playability that I like and the kind of look of the original instrument, and also more binding. So this fretboard is going to be bound, and I'm also going to be binding over the ends of the frets, so I have the little nubs on that you'd get on a vintage Gibson. Okay. So the first step in this is to get the fretboard blank prepared. Now this is a little bit over thickness, it's about 8.5 millimeters, and I realistically need it finished at 6mm, but I'm going to leave a little bit more meat on than that because there is quite a lot of work that needs to take place before we get this glued onto the neck, and I want to leave a little bit of room for adjustment and a little bit of room for error. So I'm going to probably plane this down to about 7mm. Now, I could just stick this through the thicknesser. I could super glue and masking tape it onto a thicker piece of wood and run it through the thicknesser and take the extra material off that way. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use a hand plane if I can. And the reason I want to try that first is because it will just give me a bit of feedback about how I can then proceed with the board. Ideally, I want to rough in the radius on the fretboard with a hand plane just to save me a load of sanding. However, I'm going to have to do that after I've recessed all the positions for the block markers. And if this rosewood isn't going to plane nicely without any of that cut into it, it definitely won't once it's in. So taking that thickness off with a hand plane will just give me the reassurance I need for the rest of the processes on the fretboard. So to get this started, I'm simply going to super glue and masking tape down to the bench. And I'm just going to use my favourite Stanley number 4. I've just sharpened the blade and I've set it up with the chip breaker right up close to the edge of the blade so that hopefully it will prevent any kind of tear out as I'm planing this. Just give it a quick wax up and we'll get going. Okay, so that's thickness down now, and it's actually gone quite well. There is a bit at this end where the figure is reversing a little bit, so it is pulling up a touch. So what I'll do is I will probably make that the nut end of the fingerboard, so I can kind of lose most of that material once I trim this to shape. But other than that, it planed really nicely, so I'm really happy with that and quite confident that I can now get on and do what I was going to do with it. So the next job on this is to kind of get it marked up for its centre lines and then set it up in the jig to cut the fret slots. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do in preparing this for the slotting is to get a centre line in, and normally I would draw these onto a fingerboard, but because there's so much work going to get done to this one, I'm actually going to put it in with a marking gauge and try and establish a line that's going to be a little bit more durable. So I'm just going to set this up. The board's about 73 mil, so I'm going to go kind of 36.5. And just put a gauge line down the middle of it. I'll just put some pencil in that just so I can see it a bit better. So with that done, we can now mount it onto our fret slotting jig, and we're going with the 24 3/4 inch scale length. So we'll have to kind of mount that something like that. So I'm just going to run some masking tape along that. And then I'm just going to mount this onto here with some super glue and masking tape, and just aligning the centre line with the line that I drew on the template. And I just need to be careful that the edge of the fretboard is set back from these little notches, but apart from that, as long as it's parallel, it doesn't really matter where it's at. And that's now ready to go into the slotting jig. And for anyone who might not have seen this jig before, if you see there's a tiny little pin that sticks up from the base of the jig. And the template just locates onto that pin. You cut your slot, move it to the next one, etc, etc, until you've gone all the way down the board. And as long as you keep the template pushed square against the side of the jig and the stops are set up in the right position, your saw cuts will be perfectly perpendicular to your centre line, and you'll get nice accurate fret spacing. Okay, let's get cutting. When I start to get a little bit further down the fretboard, it becomes quite difficult to hold because you've only got a small little section of fretboard left at this end, and obviously it doesn't give you much leverage, so I'll just use a clamp on the other end just to hold it in position while I cut. And there it is, all nicely cut. So what I'm going to do now is very gently remove the template from the back. And you have to be careful with these because they kind of do bend if you're not gentle when you take them off. And then we can actually use this template just to visually check how we've done. And that's absolutely spot on. Brilliant. These templates really are worth having. They're not cheap to buy, but if you're going to be making more than 1 or 2 guitars, they're really well worth the investment. I did it for years with an old steel rule with some masking tape stuck to it, and I'd marked off the fret positions off another neck. And while it worked and you could get a certain degree of accuracy with it, it was very, very time consuming to do it this way. And as you've just seen, I've cut all of those fret slots in probably 10 minutes maximum using this method. So yeah, it's one of the occasions where spending the money really is worthwhile. And I'm not sure how well you'll see this, but we offer the template up and it's absolutely spot on with all the slots that we've just cut, and the slots are really nice and parallel to each other, so that's all brilliant. Okay, so the next operation is to kind of figure out where all these position markers need to go and get them marked out ready for cutting their recesses. And as you can imagine, that's not going to be a 5-minute job, so I'm going to leave that till next time. So as always, like if you've liked, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.